Welcome to the Dark Hour, where shadows hold secrets and every story is a journey into the unknown. I'm your host, Mr. Dark, and tonight we delve into a tale that will leave you questioning the boundaries of life, death, and the ties that bind us to the past. This is the story of Sam Grayson, an ordinary young man whose life takes a chilling turn when he begins to dream of a brutal murder. One that isn't his, but feels hauntingly familiar. As the lines between past and present blur, Sam is forced to confront a vengeful spirit and an old family feud that refuses to stay buried. But here's the question: how far would you go to uncover the truth? And what if that truth demanded a price? Stay with me as we unravel the chilling events of reincarnation, a tale of vengeance and redemption. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and let's step into the darkness together. The clock struck 3 a.m. as Sam Grayson bolted upright in bed, his chest heaving and sweat soaking his sheets. The nightmare had returned. Its vivid, gut-wrenching scenes burned into his mind like a brand. He pressed his hands against his face, willing the images to fade, but they wouldn't. In the dream, Sam was someone else, a towering man, bound in chains, his muscles straining against the iron shackles. Around him stood masked figures with cold eyes and cruel grins. The leader of the group, a man with a deep, guttural voice, stepped forward holding a heavy axe. The victim, whose identity Sam felt he shared, let out a thunderous roar. "If you leave me with even one hand," the man shouted, his voice laced with venom, "I'll come back for you. You'll pay for this, every last one of you." The axe fell, severing a hand in a single brutal strike. Blood spattered across the rough stone floor as the man's defiant scream echoed endlessly. Sam could still hear it as he sat trembling in the dark of his room. The details of the dream, stone walls, torches burning in iron sconces, and the metallic tang of blood, were uncomfortably specific. He could even feel the phantom pain in his wrists, as if they had been bound for real. "Sam, are you okay?" called his mother, Eleanor, from the hallway. Her voice brought a flicker of comfort. "I'm fine, Mom," Sam replied shakily, though he clearly wasn't. Eleanor opened the door and entered, her worry deepening as she flicked on the bedside lamp. "Another bad dream?" Sam nodded. "The same one. It's always the same. Chains, blood, and that scream." Eleanor sat beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "You've had these dreams for as long as I can remember. They'll pass, Sam. You're probably just stressed with school and everything." Sam wanted to believe her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was more than that. These weren't normal dreams. They felt more like memories. But whose memories? And why were they his? The next morning at breakfast, Sam joined his father, Nathan, and younger sister Abby at the kitchen table. His older brother Mark scrolled through his phone at the counter, too engrossed to join in the conversation. "You looked like hell, Sam," Mark remarked with a smirk, not even glancing up. "Another all-nighter gaming?" "Shut up, Mark," Sam muttered, stabbing at his scrambled eggs with a fork. Nathan lowered his newspaper. "Sam, if something's bothering you, we should talk about it. Are these nightmares still going on?" Eleanor shot him a look. "Nathan, don't make it worse." "It's fine, Dad," Sam said quickly, not wanting another lecture about sleeping schedules or screen time. "Just a bad dream." Nathan sighed but let it go. The conversation shifted to the weather, school, and Mark's upcoming baseball game, but Sam wasn't listening. His thoughts drifted back to the man in chains, the axe, and the raw hatred in that voice. He didn't notice Abby staring at him intently. "Sam," she said softly, "did it happen again? The creepy dream?" Sam hesitated but nodded. Abby leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think maybe it's like those ghost stories? You know, the ones about people remembering past lives?" "Abby, don't encourage him," Eleanor interrupted, her tone exasperated. "It's just a dream. Sam needs sleep, not spooky theories." Abby shrugged, her eyes lingering on her brother. Sam managed a faint smile at her curiosity, but deep down, her words struck a chord. That afternoon, Sam tried to focus at the small library where he worked part-time, but the images of his dream haunted him. As he shelved books in the history section, his gaze fell on a dusty volume titled Legends of the Ozarks. Almost on instinct, he pulled it out and flipped through the pages. One chapter caught his attention: the Grayson-Sinclair feud, bloodlines torn asunder. Sam's heart raced as he scanned the text. It told of a bitter rivalry between two families, the Graysons and the Sinclairs, that began decades ago over disputed land. There were vague accounts of treachery, betrayal, and a mysterious murder, one that had never been solved. The air around Sam seemed to grow colder. A chill ran down his spine as he read the name Jacob Grayson, described as a powerful and feared figure whose death had marked the feud's darkest chapter. Sam's hand trembled as he closed the book. He had never heard of Jacob Grayson before, yet the name felt achingly familiar. That night, as the wind howled outside his bedroom window, Sam lay awake, his mind a storm of questions. Who was Jacob Grayson? Could the man in his dreams be him? And why did Sam feel so connected to a past that wasn't his? As the clock struck midnight, Sam's room grew deathly still. The faint creak of a floorboard made him freeze. Slowly, he turned his head toward the darkened corner by his closet. Two glowing, ember-like eyes stared back at him. Sam awoke the next morning with a pounding headache and the unnerving memory of glowing eyes burning into his mind. He had spent hours convincing himself it was nothing, just a trick of his overtired brain. Still, the cold sweat on his sheets and the uneasy weight in his chest wouldn't let him forget. After work, he returned to the library and checked out Legends of the Ozarks. He also borrowed a genealogy book and headed home with a plan. If Jacob Grayson was real, maybe there was a connection to his family. He holed himself up in his room, flipping through pages until the pieces began to fit together like a grim puzzle. Jacob Grayson had been his great-grandfather, a landowner in Whitfield who was feared and respected in equal measure. The book detailed how Jacob had been betrayed by his cousin, Alan Sinclair, during a bitter feud over land rights. Alan had reportedly lured Jacob to a meeting under the pretense of settling their dispute, only to ambush him. Jacob's death, brutal and mysterious, had sparked whispers of curses and revenge that lingered for years in local lore. One particular sentence made Sam's stomach churn. The body of Jacob Grayson was discovered with his hands severed and his neck broken, but local authorities never found enough evidence to charge Alan Sinclair or his men. Sam stared at the page, his breath hitching. Severed hands, a broken neck. It was exactly as he had seen in his dreams. His pulse thundered in his ears as he remembered the rage in the victim's voice, the voice that somehow felt like his own. Sam slammed the book shut and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. This couldn't be a coincidence. Was it possible that the nightmares he had been having for years weren't just dreams? Could they be memories? The idea was absurd, yet it gnawed at him with relentless insistence. Over the next few days, Sam's obsession grew. He combed through old newspaper clippings and online archives, piecing together the tangled history of the Grayson-Sinclair feud. He learned about the two families' parallel rise to power and their eventual clash over a stretch of fertile farmland. What began as a legal dispute turned into outright warfare, culminating in Jacob's gruesome death. The more Sam read, the more unsettling details he uncovered. Reports spoke of eerie phenomena surrounding Jacob's murder site: crops that refused to grow, animals that wouldn't venture near, and locals who claimed to hear disembodied screams on stormy nights. Some whispered that Jacob's spirit had never found peace. It wasn't just historical accounts that bothered Sam. It was how much they resonated with his life now. The stormy arguments between his father, Nathan, and Alan Sinclair's grandson, Gerald, had always felt like mere neighborly spats. But now, Sam began to see them in a different light. Gerald Sinclair wasn't just a rival farmer. He was the descendant of Alan Sinclair, the man Sam believed had betrayed Jacob. "Sam, you've been locked in here for hours." Abby's voice broke through his thoughts one evening. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Are you seriously still reading about the feud?" Sam hesitated before answering. "It's more than that, Abby. I think there's something about our family that Dad isn't telling us." "Like what?" He gestured toward the books spread out on his desk. "Jacob Grayson, our great-grandfather. I've been dreaming about him. I think I'm remembering what happened to him." Abby's brow furrowed. "Like reincarnation?" Sam nodded slowly. "Maybe. I don't know how else to explain it. The dreams, the details, they match everything I've found about his death. And then there's the feud with the Sinclairs." Abby's eyes widened. "Wait, are you saying this is still about the Sinclairs?" "Sam, this feud is ancient history. Gerald Sinclair probably doesn't even care about it anymore." Sam leaned forward, his voice low. "What if it's not history to Jacob? What if he's still angry? Angry enough to—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Abby stared at him, her skepticism fading. "So, what do you do about it? Just keep reading old books?" Sam shook his head. "I don't know. But something's happening, Abby. I can feel it." That night, Sam approached his father with caution. Nathan was sitting in his usual spot in the living room, nursing a beer and watching the evening news. "Dad?" Sam began hesitantly. "Can I ask you something?" Nathan muted the television, raising an eyebrow. "What's on your mind, kid?" "Did you ever hear about Jacob Grayson?" Sam asked. "Like anything weird?" Nathan stiffened almost imperceptibly, his gaze flickering to the floor before meeting Sam's. "Why do you ask?" Sam took a deep breath. "I've been having these dreams, and I've been reading about him. The books say he was murdered by Alan Sinclair." Nathan's jaw tightened. "That's not something you need to worry about, Sam. It's old family business, dead and buried." "But what if it's not?" Sam pressed. "What if he's still here?" Nathan stood abruptly, his face darkening. "I said drop it, Sam. There's nothing to gain by digging up the past. Do you understand me?" Sam flinched at his father's sudden anger, but nodded silently. Nathan walked out of the room, leaving Sam with more questions than answers. His father's reaction was all the confirmation he needed. There were secrets about Jacob Grayson, and Nathan was determined to keep them buried. As Sam retreated to his room, the sense of being watched returned, stronger than ever. Shadows danced in the corners of his vision, and the air seemed heavier, colder. That night, the nightmare came again, more vivid than before. The chains were tighter, the axe sharper, and the voice louder. "You will avenge me, won't you?" Sam woke with a start, gasping for air. The rage coursing through him felt alien and overwhelming, as though it didn't belong to him, but to someone else entirely. The tension in the Grayson household grew unbearable over the next week. Sam's mood darkened as his nightmares became increasingly violent. The man in chains, Jacob, seemed to demand more of him, the voice in his dreams urging him to seek vengeance. During the day, strange things began happening around the house. One morning, Sam found his window wide open, though he was certain he had locked it the night before. At dinner, a glass shattered on its own, sending shards flying across the table. A cold draft lingered in the air, no matter how tightly the windows were sealed. The family dog, Max, refused to enter Sam's room, growling at the doorway as if sensing something no one else could see. Sam tried to focus on his normal routine, but even simple tasks felt overwhelming. His hands trembled, and his temper flared unpredictably. At the library, he nearly broke a filing cabinet handle in frustration after a small jam. At home, he slammed a door so hard the frame splintered. His strength, unnatural and alarming, seemed to be growing. One evening, Sam stood in front of the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on his face. He gripped the edges of the sink, trying to steady his nerves. "Get a grip," he muttered to himself. "You're losing it." But as he looked up, his reflection seemed wrong. For a brief moment, the man staring back wasn't him. It was Jacob, towering, broad-shouldered, with eyes that burned like embers. Sam stumbled back, blinking furiously, but the image was gone. He stared at his own pale, gaunt face, heart pounding in his chest. Later that night, Sam sat in his darkened room, trying to make sense of what was happening. His sister, Abby, peeked in, her expression wary. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. Sam gave a weak laugh. "Maybe I have." Abby hesitated before stepping inside. "Sam, I'm worried about you. We all are. Mum says you barely eat. Dad's freaking out about the broken door. And you're not acting like yourself." "Who am I acting like?" Sam asked sharply, his voice harsher than he intended. Abby flinched but pressed on. "I don't know. But it's not you. It's like you're someone else." Sam buried his face in his hands. "I think I am someone else, Abby. At least part of the time. I feel like something's taking over." Abby sat beside him, her voice low and hesitant. "Do you think it's Jacob?" Sam looked at her, his eyes hollow. "It has to be. It's the only thing that makes sense. He's inside me, or I'm him. I don't know where I end and he begins anymore." Abby shivered, glancing toward the dark corners of the room. What if he's trying to use you for something?" Sam nodded grimly. "He is. He wants revenge, and I don't know if I can stop him." The next day, things escalated. Sam and Nathan were working together on the family's tractor when Nathan made an offhand comment about Gerald Sinclair. Sam didn't remember what was said. It was something minor, a passing mention, but the name ignited a fury inside him that he couldn't control. "What do you mean by that?" Sam snapped, his voice unnaturally deep. Nathan turned to him, startled. "What's wrong with you, Sam? I didn't mean anything by it." "Didn't mean anything?" Sam's fists clenched. "You don't care about what the Sinclairs did to us, to Jacob?" Nathan paled. "Sam, calm down. We're not talking about this." Sam stepped closer, towering over his father in a way that seemed impossible. "They murdered him, Dad, and you want to just let it go?" "Sam!" Nathan's voice cracked. "That's enough." Realizing what he was doing, Sam backed away, horrified at himself. His hands were trembling, and his heart felt like it might burst from his chest. Without a word, he turned and ran toward the woods behind the house. Deep in the forest, Sam collapsed against a tree, gasping for air. He didn't know how far he had run, but the cool, damp air was a small relief against the fire burning inside him. He closed his eyes, but Jacob's voice was there again, sharp and accusing. "You're wasting time, boy. They deserve justice. They deserve to pay for what they did to me." "No," Sam whispered, clutching his head. "Leave me alone. You're weak, just like your father. You think they'll stop, that they'll ever let you live in peace. They'll destroy you just like they destroyed me." Sam screamed, his voice echoing through the trees. The ground beneath him seemed to tremble, and the air grew colder. When he opened his eyes, the forest felt different, darker, more menacing. In the distance, he saw a shadowy figure standing between the trees. Its glowing eyes locked onto him, and Sam felt his legs turn to jelly. He blinked, and the figure was gone, but the sensation of being watched remained. By the time Sam returned home, it was late, and the house was eerily quiet. He went straight to his room, ignoring the worried looks from his family. He didn't want to talk. He didn't even want to think. But sleep didn't come easily. When it finally did, the dream returned, more vivid and terrifying than ever. He was Jacob again, bound and bleeding, the masked men closing in. But this time, when the axe fell, Sam didn't wake up. He felt the searing pain, the weight of his broken body, and the overwhelming rage that surged through Jacob's soul. When Sam finally jolted awake, it was past midnight. His reflection in the window showed his eyes, no longer their usual brown, but the same fiery amber as the man in his dreams. Sam's descent into Jacob's rage was no longer subtle, it was undeniable. His once quiet demeanor was replaced with a volatile energy that scared everyone around him, especially himself. His family tiptoed around him, afraid to provoke his sudden outbursts. Even the house itself seemed to react to his moods, with doors creaking open on their own and lights flickering at random. It was Abby who finally stepped in. She couldn't bear to see her brother unravel any further, and she knew they needed help. Ignoring their father's protests, she convinced Sam to visit a local spiritualist, Margaret Fowler, who was rumored to have dealt with paranormal phenomena in the area. Margaret lived on the edge of Whitfield, in a weathered old house surrounded by overgrown vegetation. When Sam and Abby arrived, Margaret seemed to be expecting them. The elderly woman opened the door with a knowing smile and gestured for them to enter. Her living room smelled of sage and old books, and an assortment of charms hung from the walls. "You're carrying a heavy burden," Margaret said, her sharp eyes fixed on Sam. "It clings to you like a shadow." Sam stiffened, glancing at Abby. "You know what's happening to me?" Margaret nodded solemnly. "The spirit of Jacob Grayson is strong. He's tied to you by blood and fate, but his anger is poisoning you. If you don't confront him, he'll take over completely." Sam swallowed hard. "How do I confront him?" Margaret lit a bundle of sage and began circling the room, her voice calm but firm. "We'll call him forth and let him speak, but know this. Spirits like Jacob don't let go easily. He'll test you. You'll need to be strong." Sam glanced at Abby, who gave him a reassuring nod. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it." Margaret began the ritual, chanting softly as she sprinkled salt around the room and lit candles. The air grew thick, and the temperature dropped sharply. Sam shivered, feeling the now familiar sensation of being watched. Suddenly, the flame of a candle flickered violently, and a low growl reverberated through the room. Sam's chest tightened as he felt an invisible weight press down on him. His breathing quickened, and his hands clenched into fists. "Jacob Grayson," Margaret called, her voice steady. "I summon you to speak through this vessel. Reveal yourself." Sam let out a sharp gasp as his body stiffened. His head snapped up, and his eyes burned with an amber glow. When he spoke, it wasn't his voice. It was deep, commanding, and full of wrath. "Why have you brought me here?" Jacob demanded, his gaze piercing Margaret. Margaret stepped forward, unflinching. "You are tormenting this boy, Jacob. He carries your blood, but not your vengeance. Why are you here?" Jacob's laugh was cold and hollow. "Torment? Number, this boy is my legacy. My will flows through his veins. The Sinclairs stole my life. Now they will pay." Margaret's expression hardened. "And after they pay, what then? Do you think this will bring you peace?" Jacob's face twisted in fury. "Peace? There is no peace for the wronged. I was betrayed, slaughtered like an animal. My blood cries out for justice." Abby stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. "But you're hurting Sam. He's your family, your great-grandson. Don't you care about what this is doing to him?" Jacob's gaze snapped to her, and for a moment his expression softened. "Family?" he echoed, the word heavy with sorrow. "They let my death go unanswered. My bloodline forgot me." "No, we didn't," Sam shouted, his voice finally breaking through the spirit's control. "We didn't forget you, Jacob. But this isn't the way to fix it. You're turning me into a monster." Jacob hesitated, his fiery eyes flickering. For the first time, doubt crept into his voice. "You would forgive them? After what they did to me?" Sam took a shaky breath. "I'm not saying it was right, but revenge won't change what happened, and it won't bring you peace. It'll just destroy everything left of our family." Margaret seized the moment. She began chanting louder, raising her hands towards Sam. The room shook, and the oppressive presence of Jacob seemed to waver. "Jacob Grayson, hear me," Margaret commanded. "Your time on this plane has ended. Let go of your anger, or it will consume not just you, but those you love. Move on and find peace." Jacob let out a guttural scream, and Sam collapsed to his knees, clutching his head. The room was a whirlwind of light and shadows, the air thick with Jacob's defiance. But as Margaret continued her chant, the energy began to shift. The anger ebbed, replaced by something quieter, sorrow perhaps, or resignation. Sam looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Please," he whispered, "let me go." Jacob's fiery gaze dimmed, and his voice softened. "I only wanted justice," he said, almost mournfully. "And justice will come," Margaret said gently, "but not through vengeance. Your legacy lives on in Sam. Trust him to honor it." For a long moment Jacob lingered, his presence heavy and uncertain. Then, with a final anguished roar, the weight in the room lifted. The candles burned steadily, the shadows receded, and the cold air warmed. Sam fell forward, gasping for breath. Margaret and Abby rushed to his side, helping him to sit up. "Is he gone?" Abby asked, her voice trembling. Margaret nodded, though her expression was grave. "He's gone, for now, but Sam will need to heal, and the ties to Jacob won't fully fade until his unfinished business is resolved." Sam closed his eyes, exhausted but relieved. For the first time in weeks, his mind felt clear, but deep down, he knew this wasn't the end. Jacob's story wasn't over, and neither was his. The air in Whitfield felt heavy, as if the entire town held its breath. Though Jacob's spirit no longer pressed against Sam's consciousness, a lingering connection remained. His dreams, while no longer violent, carried an undercurrent of unfinished business, a pull he couldn't ignore. The name Sinclair was a constant drumbeat in his mind, urging him toward a confrontation he had tried to avoid. Despite Margaret's assurances, Sam knew Jacob's anger hadn't fully left. It simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to erupt. When news broke that Gerald Sinclair was hosting a gathering at his sprawling estate, Sam felt a jolt of inevitability. He tried to resist the impulse to act, but it was no use. That night, he stood at the edge of the Sinclair property, cloaked in the shadows of the dense woods. The estate was grand, its sprawling grounds lit with lanterns and floodlights. Laughter and music floated through the crisp night air as guests mingled near the house. Sam stayed in the dark, his heart pounding. He didn't know what he would do or who he would become if he stepped into the light. But then, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A man in a tailored suit stood alone on the porch, sipping a glass of whiskey. Gerald Sinclair. The sight of him ignited a fire in Sam's chest, one he couldn't extinguish. It wasn't just anger, it was Jacob's fury, surging back like a tidal wave. His vision blurred, his muscles tensed, and before he knew it, he was moving. Sam's approach was swift and silent, By the time Gerald noticed him, it was too late. Sam stood at the foot of the porch steps, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Sam Grayson," Gerald said, his voice a mixture of surprise and disdain. "What the hell are you doing here?" Sam's voice was low and rough, almost unrecognizable. "You know why I'm here." Gerald's expression darkened. "If this is about that ridiculous family feud, save it. That's ancient history, kid. We're not our ancestors." "Tell that to Jacob," Sam snapped, stepping closer. "Tell that to the man your family betrayed and murdered." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "You've lost it. You Graysons have always been crazy, clinging to old grudges like they mean something." Jacob got what was coming to him. The words struck like a match to gasoline. Sam lunged forward, grabbing Gerald by the collar and slamming him against the wall of the house. Gerald gasped, his whiskey glass shattering on the ground. "You think you can just brush it off?" Sam growled, his face inches from Gerald's. "Do you have any idea what your family did? What they stole?" "Let go of me," Gerald sputtered, trying to push Sam away, but Sam's grip was unyielding. The sound of approaching footsteps made them both freeze. A woman's voice called from inside the house. "Gerald, everything all right?" Sam loosened his grip just enough for Gerald to pull away. "You're insane!" Gerald spat, adjusting his suit. "I'm calling the police." As Gerald turned toward the door, Sam felt the rage rise again. Jacob's voice echoed in his mind, demanding vengeance. Without thinking, Sam grabbed a nearby lantern and hurled it against the wall. The glass shattered, flames licking at the wooden siding. The fire spread quickly, drawing gasps and screams from the partygoers. Gerald spun around, his face pale. "Are you out of your mind?" Sam stood motionless, watching the flames grow. The heat seared his skin, but he didn't move. He was no longer in control. Jacob was. The scene descended into chaos as guests fled the estate. Flames consumed the porch, illuminating Sam's face with an eerie glow. Gerald tried to douse the fire with a garden hose, but it was no use. Sam approached him again, his movements slow and deliberate. "You can't escape this," Sam said, his voice layered with Jacob's. "Your family's sins demand retribution." Gerald stumbled backward, tripping over the hose. "Please," he stammered, his bravado gone. "It wasn't me. I didn't do anything." Sam raised his hand, poised to strike, but then, through the haze of rage, he saw Abby's face. She stood at the edge of the chaos, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Sam, stop!" she screamed, her voice piercing through the roaring flames. "This isn't who you are." For a moment Sam hesitated. The anger in his chest faltered, replaced by a flicker of something else. Jacob's voice snarled in protest, urging him to finish what they had started, but Sam's grip on the present tightened. "I'm not you," Sam whispered, his voice breaking. "I won't let you win." With a guttural roar, Sam wrenched control from Jacob's grasp. The fire reflected in his tear-filled eyes as he turned away from Gerald and dropped to his knees. The rage ebbed, replaced by an overwhelming exhaustion. Margaret appeared beside Abby, her expression calm but resolute. She stepped forward, raising a pouch of herbs and sprinkling its contents over Sam. She began chanting softly, her words a soothing balm against the storm raging inside him. As Margaret's chant grew louder, Sam felt Jacob's presence recede. The fire's heat seemed to lessen, and the air grew still. With a final shuddering breath, the connection between Sam and Jacob was severed. The flames were eventually extinguished, and Gerald's estate was left in ruins. No lives were lost, but the event left a scar on the town, a reminder of the darkness that had festered between the Graysons and the Sinclairs for generations. Sam returned home, his body and soul battered, but intact. He knew he would carry the weight of Jacob's anger for the rest of his life, but he also knew he had broken the cycle. The feud was over, Jacob's vengeance had not claimed another victim. Abby stayed by his side that night, holding his hand as he drifted into a dreamless sleep, the first peaceful rest he'd had in years. The aftermath of the fire at the Sinclair estate rippled through Whitfield like an unrelenting storm. Gerald Sinclair, shaken but unharmed, refused to press charges against Sam, perhaps fearing the scrutiny such an investigation would bring to his family's dark history. Sam, however, wasn't free from the weight of his actions. Though the flames had been doused and Jacob's spirit exorcised, the damage, physical, emotional, and spiritual, remained. In the weeks that followed, Sam stayed close to home, avoiding town and the whispers that trailed him. His family tried to return to normalcy, but the tension lingered. Nathan often sat silently at the kitchen table, staring at his coffee as if searching for answers in its depths. Eleanor hovered around Sam, her concern palpable but unspoken. Abby was the only one who dared to bring up what had happened. "You stood up to him," she said one afternoon, her voice quiet but proud. "You stopped him, Sam. That wasn't easy." Sam stared out the window at the barren fields beyond the house. "I stopped him, but I didn't save him. Jacob died angry, and I don't think that ever changed. I don't think he'll ever really rest." Abby placed a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe not, but you gave him a chance to let go. That's more than anyone else could have done." A few days later, Margaret Fowler came to the Grayson house. She carried a small box and an air of calm authority that made everyone sit up a little straighter. "You've done well, Sam," she said, setting the box on the table. "But there's one more thing to do." Sam frowned. "I thought it was over. You said Jacob was gone." Margaret nodded. "His spirit has moved on, but the ties between your family and the Sinclairs remain. That kind of bitterness doesn't just disappear, it festers, grows. If you want to truly end this, you need to break the cycle." "How?" Sam asked, though part of him feared the answer. Margaret opened the box, revealing a collection of old letters, deeds, and photographs. "These belonged to Jacob. They were passed down through your family, a record of the feud and everything it cost. It's time to let them go." Later that evening, the Graysons gathered in the backyard around a small fire pit. Margaret guided them in silence as Sam placed each item into the flames. A photograph of Jacob, proud and fierce, curled and blackened in the heat. Letters chronicling the land dispute turned to ash. The deeds, with their neatly typed accusations and counterclaims, dissolved into embers. As the last item burned, Margaret spoke. "This fire is not for vengeance, but for release. The past no longer binds you. Let it go and live for what lies ahead." The flames flickered and died, leaving only smoke and a pile of ash. Sam stared into the remnants, feeling an odd mix of relief and sadness. Jacob's story was part of his own, but it no longer defined him. The weight he had carried for so long began to lift. Over the next few weeks, the Grayson family began to heal. Nathan reached out to Gerald Sinclair, and though their conversation was brief and awkward, it marked the first step toward reconciliation. Abby returned to her usual chatter, filling the house with warmth that had been missing for months. Even Eleanor seemed lighter, her worry lines softening as the days passed. Sam found solace in small things, mornings spent walking through the woods, afternoons helping his father with the farm, evenings laughing with Abby over old movies. The nightmares no longer came, and though the memory of Jacob's fury lingered, it no longer controlled him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sam stood at the edge of the fields. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying with it a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that he could move forward, that the Grayson family could build something new from the ashes of their past. Margaret visited one last time before the first frost of the season. She handed Sam a small charm made of woven herbs and twine. "This will remind you of what you've overcome," she said. "But you don't need me anymore. You've already proven your strength." Sam smiled, tucking the charm into his pocket. "Thank you for everything." As Margaret drove away, Sam watched her taillights fade into the distance. He turned back toward the house, where his family waited inside. The warmth of their laughter spilled out into the night, a reminder that even the darkest chapters could lead to brighter days. The feud was over, the cycle was broken, and Sam, at last, was free.